Chapter 61, Dead. He felt some form of heavy burden on his mind. It was as though a mountain suddenly fell on him. There was just no other way of explaining it. Arg. Steve screamed as he fell to his feet. Still human, nonetheless, the being said before Steve felt something like a hand grip his heart. He didn't know if the hand was real or if it was just his imagination, but soon he knew one thing: he didn't want to die. At least not now. Steve tried his best to overpower the feeling he currently felt, but all to no avail. His own body didn't seem to follow his commands. Soon he felt a squeeze in his heart as his eyes rolled back and he fell to the ground. His breath stopped, life signs vanished. Silence reigned throughout the clearing. Even the treants who stood watching from afar remained silent as they watched. The voice was not heard again, but the egg cracked open as a grotesque hand punched its way out and began creating a larger hole to climb out of. All watched as a human-sized creature walked out of the egg. Its appearance as grotesque as things could get. Its face seemed to be incomplete, with half of it showcasing the skull. The creature's flesh seemed to be fall off as though it wasn't attached properly. As the creature walked out, it immediately turned to the dead body just a few centimeters before it. How? The creature asked. "T is but a scratch," a familiar voice joked as he stood back up as though nothing happened. How? The voice asked again. It was impossible. The other party was dead, so how was he standing before him? As long as he remembered, only one man could die and resurrect himself without even as much as an issue, and that person ruled over death and souls. This should be impossible. Sometimes killing someone isn't enough to kill them, Steve replied as he wiped the blood from his eyes. Interesting. My early resurrection may be worth it if I kill you, the creature said as a horrified aura burst forth from its body. Steve, on the other hand, immediately jumped out of the way, utilizing both his enhanced ability and his suit to do so. He couldn't afford to take any damage at the moment. He wasn't done repairing his body yet. He hadn't resurrected himself, he just never died in the first place. Whatever the creature was, had stopped his heart from beating. Normally that would mean death, but Steve wasn't one to die just like that. Using his ability, he took control of every function performed by the heart. At the same time, he tried his best to reactivate his heart to resume its function. "Come," Steve said as the sword which was lying on the floor came flying into his hand. He couldn't see how he would win exactly. This was a being that had just stopped his heart from beating without even being present. Who knew what it was capable of? Chapter 62, Nuclear Fission. As expected of the administrator's vessel, the creature said before suddenly vanished from sight. Fast, Steve thought before reaching out with Architect's touch. He had used this ability a lot. Understand one thing, and that was that nothing was beyond his ability to manipulate, even the very atoms in the air. Creating an invincible wall all around himself, Steve was soon sent flying back as he skid across the ground and slammed into a tree, but he wasn't more injured than normal. The creature, on the other hand, now had half a face and a head-sized hole in its chest. "You really do have good control over the administrator's abilities," the creature said before suddenly flying off the ground. "Shit," Steve cussed as he saw mana and soul energy gathering towards the creature. It was trying to reform itself, to complete its resurrection. Knowing this, Steve forewent his injury and immediately rushed forward, creating a massive atomic and soul barrier around them, isolating them from the outside world. The goal was to lock him in with the creature while keeping out any extra mana or soul energy than that which he already absorbed. "Smart," the creature commented before the earth began to quake. Steve didn't know what was going on anymore, but he did know that he needed to kill this being before it regained its power. Using wind magic to push off the ground, Steve found himself flying through the air. This wasn't walking on an invisible platform, this was legit flight. However, just before he could reach the creature, he felt some kind of invisible hand grab hold of him. "It seems I have been gone for too long that even humans now dare to fight me," the creature said before Steve was suddenly sent flying into the ground with such force that it nearly disrupted his artificial blood flow. "You're really strong," Steve said in between breaths. "Die," the creature screamed as Steve saw the elements leave his control. He didn't know how it was possible or if it was even possible at all, but due to the suit's elemental magic he had a constant connection to the elements around him, but it was nowhere to be seen now. "He's a better mage," Steve noted before he took a stance preparing himself for what was to come. Normally he would try to evade, but exactly where was he running to? He had locked down this space. It was just him and the enemy. Steve saw a large amount of the earth suddenly go up into the air before completely liquefying to form several earth spikes. They numbered in their hundreds if not thousands. Beside them were several icicles that simply floated there. Steve also felt the air leave his presence. It was slow, but it would happen and he would have locked himself inside a vacuum. Taking a deep breath, Steve prepared for the battle as the large volume of spikes began flying towards him almost as though they were bullets from a Gatling gun. Steve jumped and ran while maintaining a constant barrier of air he had pulled from the creature using his ability. Seeing the number of spikes reducing dramatically, he stopped and immediately took aim towards the creature. "Let's see how you handle nuclear fission," he said as he slapped his hands together and immediately pulled them apart. As he did so, a small ball of plasma appeared in between his hands. Seeing this, the creature immediately coated itself in some weird bubble, but somehow he couldn't tell what element it was. Steve wasted no time as he unleashed the energy created by the fission outward towards his opponent. Boom. Chapter 63, Overpowered. A loud explosion was heard as both parties were sent flying. The force was too great for Steve alone to handle, but thankfully he wasn't on the receiving end. Smoke filled the area, but Steve had no plans to let go as he created several more fission reactions as explosion after explosion rocked the barrier. He, himself, could be seen shielded by several layers of atomic barriers. However, his hands never stopped as he created more and more until there was nothing around them anymore. "Am I still weak?" Steve asked proudly, but a last fission reaction could be seen in between his hands. He didn't know how powerful that thing was, but he knew, or at least that nothing would be able to survive the violent explosion of energy that was the splitting of atomic nuclei. "What is your name, human?" A voice was heard as the smoke quickly to reveal a humanoid-looking creature. It was completely different from what he was initially fighting. This new creature looked a bit like an elf than the grotesque thing he was fighting. Its power was also on a whole new level, but Steve didn't plan to let his guard down because of this new change. Unleashing the last plasma ball in his hands against the opponent, he immediately reinforced his defenses and increased his pace of repair to his body. Those don't work on me anymore. Now your name, human. The creature said before slapping the reaction away into the barrier where it exploded. Steve Grant. Steve replied truthfully. No, this Steve Grant, the one who killed you is Baron. You have proven to deserve that much, the elf-like being answered. I already figured out that much, but are you really sure you want to make this physical? Steve asked. He could tell what he was about to do. At first he was scared, but he knew for sure that not even a single atom had breached this space since he locked it down. Baron, or whatever he was called, was burning his soul power to match him in physical power. The initial high levels of mana he once sensed were now gone, and instead, he could see a high-level amount of power packed into the being's muscles. Never underestimate an opponent, a voice said from behind him as Steve found a knife where his heart would be. As if I would, Steve replied as he broke the knife. In doing so, Baron realized his mistake. His opponent outclassed him in every way. His current form puts him on a level far below this human. Steve, utilizing his newfound advantage, immediately grabbed hold of the stunned creature. Slamming the elf-like into the ground, Steve immediately unleashed a flurry of punches, all aimed towards what he thought was a vital point for the creature. It wasn't human, nor did it even have any sort of organic matter within it. Steve didn't know what it was, so he simply aimed for vital mana points to hit and break or block. Wait. Bam. I'll give you what? Bam. Wait. I'll. Bam. Chapter 64. Win. Steve didn't care to know what it wanted to say or what it planned to do. He continued his punches, never giving the creature time to think or move. This wasn't enough to put it down, and he knew that his punches could never kill this being. That much he knew now. He needed something that would be able to completely kill it. Come, he called out to the sword that had somehow left his hand during the earlier fight. Die. Steve screamed as he stabbed the creature over and over again. He didn't let up until he was sure he had minced it into pieces. I will be back, human. Steve heard the creature's voice one last time before all life signs ceased. As soon as the voice faded, Steve felt a huge burden lift off his body. He really had more influence on me than I thought, Steve thought as he collapsed on his knees. His entire body was in pain. His heart was still shut down and he had yet to repair it, so losing consciousness at the moment wasn't ideal. There were multiple holes in his body from the being's spike rain. He had endured all because he had long shut down his pain receptors, but this was excessive. His bones too were in pieces, and above all he was nearly blind. He could barely see, everything was a blur. Due to his abilities, he may have been splitting atoms as though it were nothing, but the energy created was so powerful and bright that he was nearly blinded. Most of his bones were crushed even through the several layers of barriers he had set in place. Steve chuckled before bursting out into full laughter. He had grown much stronger than when he came. His abilities were no longer I should be able to do so. He now knew what he was capable of. As he knelt there staring at the corpse before him, Steve suddenly felt the familiar force saturate his body again. He felt his once shattered bones begin to repair themselves. His torn muscles and the holes in his body began to heal at a pace visible to the human eye. Thank God, Steve said as he finally managed to stand up. He could feel his heart finally come back online. His body no longer needed him to actively circulate his blood and oxygenate his blood. Finally letting down the barrier that he had used to enclose himself and the opponent, Steve saw the amount of devastation they had done to the environment. He was within a very deep hole, a massive but incredibly deep hole. And all around him was an unnatural level of heat. He could sense it even with his suit on. Along with those was an overwhelming amount of soul energy, energy that being, Baron had gathered to fully revive itself. Haha, the power of the sun in the palm of my hands. Steve joked as he laughed with newfound energy as he flew out of the hole he had created with his explosions. Chapter 65, No Exit. Now high up in the sky, Steve saw that the hole occupied nearly half of the forest biome. His attacks really were more devastating than he initially thought it to be. Staying up there for a while, he looked around for an exit but found none. Even with his now repaired scanners, he could sense any anomaly in the mana waves of the gate. Wasn't he the boss? It should be open by now. What's wrong? He asked himself as he gently lowered himself to the ground, just beside the corpse. He couldn't sense any mana signature similar to that of Baron's, so he was sure he had killed him. Or did he really do so? He wasn't sure, but he did know that for now, there were no other signs of Baron anywhere within the gate. Wait, do I have to kill every single creature here before the exit appears? Steve asked as he turned towards the other half of the forest. He could sense several hundreds if not thousands of treants standing and waiting there just like they were when he began his battle with Baron. At least I get enough time to rest before I exit, Steve said before immediately picking up the corpse and flying out of the hole. He retreated back to the truck, which was now melted down even if it was far away from the battlefield. Using his powers, he recreated the truck along with his floating orbs. Their duty was yet to end even if he was now significantly stronger. Most of the materials he had collected previously were damaged, but thankfully he had some left. At least enough for one last creation. Steve lay on his newly recreated bed as a smile appeared on his face. He had survived and there was now a way back home. As he lay there, he thought of every encounter he had with death, including the most recent one. He didn't know what sort of ability the Baron guy had, but he could tell that he only won due to luck. Well, mostly because his opponent underestimated him greatly. Even with his thoughts flying everywhere, Steve couldn't escape the hold of Morpheus and he soon fell asleep. His body may have been rejuvenated by Baron's soul energy, but his mind was a whole different case. The battle wasn't just physically tasking, it was much more mentally tasking than he wanted. Performing the duties of the heart, holding one's entire body together and fighting against such an overpowered being at the same time was impossible if not for his unnatural abilities. While he slept to regain his strength, the treants somehow remained in place even if it was clear that the boss was gone. The night passed in silence as Steve slept peacefully. The chairman is here, a voice shouted as various cameras flashed and others changed direction. Damn, this is really turning out to be the scoop of a lifetime, all the S-rank and a national level hunter in one location at the same time, one of the journalists in the area said as the others nodded. Meanwhile, a few meters away from them, a black sedan car could be seen. Out of the car came a large man. The man, despite the obvious gray hair on his face, walked and moved as though he was still in his prime. Mr. Chairman, the S-ranks within the venue said in unison as they bowed as a sign of respect. Chapter 66, Red Gate Break. The man wasn't just the chairman of the association, he was also a national-level hunter, a being whose power was so immense that it made their power look like child's play. Behind him was a young man who looked to have just entered his 20s, the man wore a simple top and trousers but over that he wore a black coat. Despite his obvious extraordinary entrance, none focused on him as all cameras turned to the god in man's world, the chairman who was suppressing all four guilds single-handedly. Chairman Jin Chul and the rest of the association employees in the area greeted with a soft bow. Has the gate shown any signs of breaking? The chairman asked as he ignored all others who were trying to approach him. This has gone beyond him praying for the safety of the victim of this red gate. He was the association chairman and his job was to ensure the safety of the citizens of Korea. This was an S-rank red gate, the first of its kind. An S-rank gate was already a different kind of danger on its own, but one that was a red gate is tripled in danger. A red gate is a mysterious gate that opens at any time and could never be predicted even if the gate was right in front of you. The requirements to trigger its nature was unknown. You could enter the gate and exit it and nothing would happen, but your neighbor would do the same and boom. It's a red gate. It was unpredictable. Above that, the interior of a red gate was usually different from a normal gate. Usually it was much larger, even to the extent of being considered a continent within a gate. It could have more than one boss or sometimes no boss at all. Instead, you need to complete a specific requirement to leave. An S-ranked red gate would mean that the monsters within were at least at the A rank and above, with the boss usually being above the S rank. If the victim isn't able to clear the gate, then it will break, leading to hell. He didn't expect Steve to clear the dungeon, so he had called every S rank in the country and even loaned some from other countries. It was urgent. Sir, about 2 seconds ago, the amount of mana coming from the gate increased drastically before suddenly falling short, Jin Chul reported as he handed over the reading and what looked like a damaged device. I see, and what about Mr. Grant? He asked. So far there has been no response on his part, Jin Chul replied. Do you think he would survive that? The chairman asked while pointing towards the gate. I don't know, he has already lived so long within it, but that didn't seem like something he would survive, and he has yet to respond to any call, Jin Chul replied honestly. Gates had existed for years now and there had only been 3 records of a gate breaking a recording device, and this was one of them. The first was due to the early technology and the other was in America, which brought forth the dragon known as Kamish. Finally there was this one. He didn't know what was within that gate, but he definitely knew that it was powerful. At least on par with Kamish himself, who is a disaster class monster. Chapter 67, Gate opens. For an ordinary B rank, an A rank creature was already too much. For Steve, who could be barely recognized as an E rank, the gate was too much. The fact he had survived this long was already a miracle. Let us hope his suit is as powerful as he claims, the chairman said as he stood and watched. Like the rest of the S ranks in the area, he too came prepared for a battle. Many of these S ranks may have not seen an S rank gate in action, but he had seen how powerful it was. Jeju Island was a good example of what could happen should an S rank gate be let loose. So nothing's coming, the young man beside the chairman said as they all turned to the gate. They all felt a huge amount of mana leave the gate. The amount was enough for even the normal humans to feel it. Evacuate the area. I want all hunters with transport type abilities on the job immediately. Go Gunhee shouted as he removed his jacket. His countenance changing as mana began leaking from his body. Even if still under control, it was still overbearing to many in the area. Following his orders, Jin Chul immediately got to work as they began gathering every hunter they could get. They didn't care what class, they only cared about what type of abilities the person had. If it allowed them go from point A to point B quicker than the average hunter, then they were needed. The excitement that once filled the air immediately vanished as the reporters and other journalists figured out the level of danger they were actually in. Most immediately fled the scene in whatever vehicle they came in, while some stayed to complete their duty. Mostly because even they too were hunters and believed that the association and the S rank would protect them. A few seconds later, the gate shrank as mana was poured out of it again in unbelievable amount. Every hunter watching this had their hearts in their throats. None knew what to expect. The amount of power was excessive. The young man beside the chairman pulled out 2 daggers as he took a stance. Following him, many of the hunters did the same. Of course they weren't sure if it would break then and there, but they knew that it will eventually. The gate is open, everyone get ready. Jin Chul shouted as he saw the gate turn blue. The time limit was over, or the victim inside it was finally dead. Either of the two didn't matter because they knew what was about to happen. All braced themselves for the eventual horde, but oh, thank God you guys are here. I was wondering who would give me a ride home. A male voice was heard as they watched a man who looked no older than 25 years of age step out of the gate. Following behind him was a young lady. She too looked to be of a similar age, but all of the men in the area could swear that she was the most beautiful woman they had ever seen. Chapter 68, finally out. Mr. Grant, Jin Chul asked. The one and only, by the way, what's going on? Steve asked as he pointed towards the number of weapons aimed at him. Ha ha ha, they all heard very loud laughter. Turning to its source, they found the chairman laughing heartily. None of them could understand what was so funny about this scene, but Jin Chul, Steve, and some of the association members who had been available the longest joined in and began laughing. Kid, you are the true definition of never judge a book by its cover, Go Gun, he said as he began walking towards him. However, as soon as he got within a meter of him, the lady behind Steve immediately stepped forward, blocking the path. Go Gun, he asked with his eyes as he stopped. Oh, this is Judy. I created her within the gate. She's basically an A.I. secretary/bodyguard, Steve explained as he gently dragged her aside. I see. And I see you also chose the design too, Go Gun, he said in a mocking tone. Why not? If I'm going to be seeing it every day then it might as well be female, Steve answered shamelessly. Hearing him, the chairman smiled before stepping forward as the two hugged and began walking away together. Watching their interaction, all the hunters were confused. First, who was the man? Why was he so familiar with the chairman? The questions were endless, but above all, what bothered them the most was that the gate had closed, which meant that it had been cleared. Did it mean that the man had cleared an S-rank red gate all on his own? Do you guys know who he is? A middle-aged man in a light gold and grey armor asked. He smells nice, the only female amongst them whispered. She wore a red-themed armor and in her hand was a longsword. Instantly all of them turned to look at her weirdly, making her hide her face and shrink back. Hey, I'd like to know what's going on here. Bakuno shouted as he removed the pair of golden claws he had equipped for combat. You will all learn in due time. For now, leave Go-gun, he said as he stopped in his tracks. Seeing the chairman's reaction, they all understood that the man was surely important. Even if most of them didn't know much about the chairman, it still remained a common fact that he would do anything to ensure humanity wins this war against the monsters. Steve followed the man as the two began walking towards the car. It was nearly identical to the one that had dropped him off initially, but it was a bit more luxurious. I wonder how Henry would take the news of your accomplishment, Go-gun, he said as they entered the car. Who's Henry? Steve asked. You shouldn't worry about that, he said as the smile on his face got even bigger. Did you clear that gate all by yourself? A new voice was heard as Steve turned to the front of the vehicle to see a young man. He looked no older than 25 or may even be younger. However, the amount of mana Steve felt from him was something else. Apart from that, he could sense an abundant amount of soul energy within and around the boy. Chapter 69, Sung Jin Woo. It was as though he was the living personification of the afterlife. It was disgusting and yet awe-inspiring. Who are you? Steve asked as his countenance changed. Beside him, Judy's eyes immediately lit up as her aura began growing but remained contained. She was like a tiger ready to pounce and tear him apart. Steve, calm her down or I will, Go-gun, he said as he noticed the weird atmosphere within the car. Who is he? Steve asked, never removing his eyes from the boy. I would like to know the same, the boy replied. His name is Sung Jin Woo. He is also a survivor of that double dungeon incident, Go-gun, he said, trying to defuse the tension. Oh, you're that boy. Damn, you've grown, Steve suddenly said as the tension vanished. Judy beside him also relaxed as she withdrew her intentions to kill. It was as though none of that had happened. You were in that dungeon as well? Jin Woo asked. Unfortunately, yes. That kind of explains why you felt so familiar, Steve replied as he gave a hearty laugh. You respond to people you find familiar with hostility. Go-gun, he asked. No, it's just. You wouldn't get it. Let's just say that stupid gate opened my eyes to a lot of things, Steve replied. There was truly no way he could explain it to the chairman. How do you even explain the fact that you can absorb souls and you just found someone else who can absorb souls as well? How does one even explain that the other party is like a living afterlife, with thousands of souls under him and the amount of soul energy keeps growing? Above all, he felt that the boy had some sort of similarity to Baron. He didn't know how, but he could tell that the two were related in some way or the other. There was nothing he would say that wasn't weird, so he simply moved on from it. I see, the chairman replied. Anyway, where are we going? Steve asked as he finally turned away from the boy. His situation was just as weird as his, so he didn't need to question it much. He needed to question the boy's allegiance though, but he was with the chairman and the man so far doesn't seem like a bad judge of character. For now, to your home. It seems you are still affected by what took place within that gate, Go-gun, he replied. That would be appreciated, Steve replied gratefully. The car ride continued in complete silence as Steve spent his time tinkering with a small orb which he made to constantly change its shape. In front, Jin Woo sat, but his attention never left the new hunter he just met. Even with the system, he couldn't get an accurate gauge of how powerful he was. Instead, it simply told him that he was dangerous. The chairman was already someone who he considered extremely powerful, but then came the man. The mysteries surrounding him intrigued him. They were both survivors of the dungeon, so how was he so different from him? The gap was too much. Go-gun, he sat too, and just like Jin Woo watched Steve's odd behavior. He wasn't acting like someone who had just cleared an S-rank red gate alone. Normally such people would be injured, but he didn't look even in the least bit in pain. It was as though he had literally just strolled through the place while the bosses beat themselves. Chapter 70, Home. The silent hostility continued until they approached his street. Seeing the place he hadn't seen in almost 3 months, Steve nearly wanted to cry. He may still be new to this universe, but it was his home and he had missed it greatly. Thank you, and Mr. Sung, I am sorry for my hostile attitude. 3 months of a red gate can be a lot, Steve said as soon as he and Judy left the car. No worries, sir. I understand, Sung Jin Woo replied with a smile. You've been in a red gate before? Steve asked, surprised. Mr. Sung here, cleared a red gate 2 weeks ago, Go-gun, he said. Huh, you must be pretty popular then. How come I don't know about you? It was just a C-rank gate, sir, Jin Woo replied. With your power, it should have been a breeze for you then, Steve commented. I wouldn't say that, sir. That does remind me, I think a re-evaluation is in order for the two of you, about next week. Re-evaluation? What for? Steve asked. Just come meet us at the association building, next week Wednesday, and also be prepared for the paparazzi. They will swarm you from now on, Go-gun, he warned. I'll keep that in mind. Judy, let's go, Steve said before walking into the house. Behind him, the chairman drove off after giving him one last look. He had no more use staying here. He and the boy had other businesses to attend to. Steve on the other hand entered his home with his new automaton following behind him. As soon as he entered, he immediately felt at home. He had only spent a month within his home, but at the moment, it was as though it had spent years in it. Never thought I would return back here, Steve said, feeling a little nostalgic. It may have only been 3 months within the dungeon and about 30 hours on the outside, but it felt as though it had been years since he came back here. Anyway, you come with me. I still have work to do on you, Steve said before making his way to his basement, which he had turned into a workshop. The two walked until Steve was before a large amount of raw materials, well the normal raw materials he had used previously. Judy, Steve called out as he gave way. On it sir, she replied as she stepped forward and waved her hand as a large vat appeared, and along with it were several tons of well-processed leather and other materials. This was the good thing that Steve found while creating Judy. She was capable of manipulating space. Well, to be more specific, she had a skill called the Monarch's Authority. Times. Name, Judy. Material, Celestial Corpse. Title, Monarch Surrogate. Mana, 600 M. Attributes, Immunity V, Monarch's Authority V, Impossible Body V, Intelligence V. Description: an artificial woman created by the architect's protege using the corpse of the celestial, Baron. Born/created with a body on par with the gods, she is a being that stands above many and below a few. A soul created and designed from energy by the architect's protege, she possesses intelligence beyond a human's. Monarch's Authority, drawing power from the divinity of the monarch, Baron. She is capable of commanding all elements with ease and to do her bidding. Times. Chapter 71, Judy. Her status showed him just how powerful Baron truly was. His battle with him was already in the monster's favor. He couldn't imagine what would have happened if Baron was fully resurrected and wasn't pressured to actually fight him. Judy wasn't just some automaton. He had created it just because he wanted to. He had created her with a purpose in mind. Using the materials provided, Steve immediately went to work and soon a small orb was before him. It was dull and didn't seem all that special, but it was. He placed his hand on it as the orb lit up, sending a bright lit and a subtle wave of mana to the surroundings. The orb was activated as a holographic screen appeared before him. It was a computer. If Judy was a magical artificial intelligence, he could also have created computers. The screen before him even had a home screen, a functioning operating system and everything. Of course, since it was just a heavily enchanted orb, it didn't have any other hardware. His magical programming skills were improving massively. Well, thank you Baron, Steve said as he began operating his computer. Baron's death didn't just give him more power when he died, it had passed on these weird symbols to his head. He called them runes. They were symbols or words that could interface with reality itself using any mana-empowered object as a medium. It was the real reason why Judy existed now. He had simply thought to create a new automaton from Baron's body and implant first chip into it, but he discovered that the symbols had meaning. Sit, Steve ordered as he created a chair for her. Obeying his command, she sat down as Steve turned back to the computer. He still had a lot to do. After about 3 seconds of wait, Steve finally turned to Judy, who was still sitting quietly on the chair. Placing his hand on her forward, he activated his abilities as some form of energy emerged from her body. The energy swirled and seemed to disperse on multiple occasions only to take form later on. Before him, now stood an energy being, a spirit, or a ghost. It was a soul. This was what he was working on. Judy wasn't just some automaton, she was a full-on human that he had created. She had a heart, a brain, lungs, bones, etc. She was complete. At least she appeared like that. She was an experiment, a rushed one that turned out better than he expected. Of course, he didn't create a soul from scratch. Since he could sense it and interact with it using his abilities, there was nothing stopping him from creating a full soul from the excess soul energy in that forest. It was what he had spent days on after he defeated Baron. With Judy's soul out, Steve suddenly compressed it as he slammed the tiny soul into the new computer before him. As soon as he did so, a smaller version of her appeared in holographic form just to the side of the screen. Then Steve began to work. He couldn't say that he was an expert in creating souls or intelligent beings, so he had made Judy in a way that he could easily upgrade or update her. Typing away at the holographic keyboard before him, Steve began his upgrade. He needed to refine her personality better. Well, no, he needed to better balance her emotions. The situation in the car would have resulted in that kid's early death for no good reason. He had designed her to react to his mental state. If he considered something a danger, then she too considered it a danger, but she wasn't designed to attack that thing just like that. She had nearly attacked if he didn't stop her. Her personality wasn't fully encoded and her emotions were out of whack. Of course, he added in a few more upgrades he thought of on the way here. Many of them would be useful and very noticeable in the future, while most were subtle and more internal than outward. After he was done, he extracted the soul and emerged it back to her body. However, he still didn't activate her. He had a lot more to do, most of which involved putting down all that he had initially written within his notebook while in the Red Gate. They were all valuable information that would help him rise higher in his business. Steve did so quickly before finally activating Judy. As soon as he did, her once dull eyes lit up as she came to life. Her face seemed a bit more lively than the resting face she usually had on. Comment. 9. Chapter 72, National Level Hunter? Let's go, Steve said before returning back to the main living area. Make yourself at home. There is a room down that hall to your left. It's yours. I'll be heading to bed, Steve said as a loud yawn escaped him. Ensuring that she was settled in, Steve finally went up to his room to sleep. Today was too much on him. Thankfully, he had survived everything the time-dilated gate threw at him, but God knew he wasn't stepping foot into another dungeon again. Minus the time dilation, and he had been in this world for only about a month and a few weeks, but he had faced not one but two disastrous gate incidents. It wasn't much, but considering that those were life-threatening situations, it was weird and excessive that he had faced two of them in just a month. After a brief moment of thinking, he soon fell asleep. The knowledge that he was now back within his own home made him feel safe. Back in the association building, the light still shone as various news vans could be seen parked outside it as more joined. The event of today was too newsworthy to let it be as it was. The chairman may have taken the victim of the gate away from them, but the chairman himself couldn't escape it. I am in no place to reveal anything about him to you all until he states otherwise, Mr. Go-Gun, he said as the cameras flashed. As soon as he stopped speaking, all the journalists immediately began speaking as the place became noisy. He pointed one of them out. Thank you, sir. We all understand that it is not your position to speak on behalf of this person, but is there a possibility that they could be Korea's second and third national level hunters? It is common knowledge that only national level hunters are able to clear S-rank gates alone, but the two were able to clear an S-rank red gate, which is dramatically worse than a normal S-rank gate. As much as I would love to just tell you that they are, but unfortunately we still have no idea if they cleared it or if the gate was on some weird timer or they just needed to solve the puzzle of the gate to be let out, so until a re-evaluation is made possible, I refuse to comment on that, the chairman said, shutting down all thoughts of it. This was the best he could do for now until he was actually sure of Steve's situation. Declaring him a national level hunter was the only logical option because they had seen the monsters within that gate through the images and videos Steve provided. They had records that showed just how powerful they were, mana measurements that declared them S-rank and above. Those were enough to go by, but that was what he was afraid of. The gate recorded monsters with mana records that were beyond most national level hunters. The tree monsters were all within the same parameters as him or above him. Chapter 73, Strength. He may be considered the weakest national level hunter, but even then he understood that that was only because of his age and not because of his power. Steve was able to create things that could fight evenly with such creatures. He was fighting, treating them as nothing but prey. How does he tell the public that this was a man who was truly beyond the national level? It may bring him joy, but there were 20 national level hunters in this world and each of them had relative power and strength. They lived like gods on earth. He could imagine the kind of chaos that would occur should he announce Steve's situation or provide the evidence he had that proved that S-ranks were already a pain to deal with. They would immediately seek to set up a hierarchy amongst themselves whenever a new S-rank was added. The amount of destruction that came from that alone has led to the loss of entire villages and towns. He couldn't imagine how it would be if he were to announce Steve's power. Thinking about this, he went through the rest of the small conference before finally retiring back to the headquarters. It was the only place he could go to now that he would escape these journalists. Many of them would do anything to make more money, so he intended to stay very well out of reach. The next day, Steve was awake and ready for the day. He didn't know if it was because he had spent too long within the gate that he slept so comfortably on his bed. Of course, due to his strict situation back then, he had developed the habit of waking at every turn or noise. The bloody incident was a weird exception that he still didn't have much of an explanation for. With a body free of any injuries, good health, and a new sense of power, Steve was ready to face whatever this would throw at him. Of course, he still wasn't entering another gate unless necessary. With the event behind him and a full day of nothing but relaxation, Steve immediately made his way to his sitting room as he relaxed and began watching TV. Judy could be seen in the kitchen preparing some breakfast. She wasn't just a protector, she was also created to be his assistant. Food is ready, a soft female voice was heard as Steve looked up to see Judy walking to the dining room with various things floating around her. Steve didn't think much of it after all, it was her abilities and she wasn't using it wrongly. After a while, Steve had eaten, freshened up and could not be seen in a dirty apron as he descended to his basement. Judy followed to assist as Steve got her to bring him more materials as he began to work. With a holographic list before him, he went to work. First was his suit, which was way beyond damaged. Thankfully, Judy could fold space as well as other elements, so he still had the materials he gathered within the gate. Using the materials, he was able to repair the suit and even upgrade it. It was the most powerful thing he had created so far, save for Judy, who was practically a god. Chapter 74, Commercial Grade. After that, he focused on creating a basic set. The point of all the suffering that he just underwent was simply to create the perfect hunter suit, but instead he had gotten himself stuck inside a red gate. The two worked in sync as within just an hour, a new suit could be seen sitting just in front of them. It was the commercial version of his hunter suit. Name, Hunter Suit Model 1. Materials, mana-infused threads, leather. Item type, power armor/suit. Attributes, protection 2, thermoregulation 2, comfort V, physical strengthening I, mana resistance I. Description. A power suit created by the architect, Stephen Grant. It is a commercial grade suit, designed for the purpose of enhancing the capabilities of a hunter in combat. It is highly resistant to not only physical damage but also magical damage as well. Note, it draws power from the user. World rank, A. A downsize was possible, now I just need to find a way to reduce it to C rank, Steve thought to himself. Downgrading the suit was hard to do because it wasn't created to be that weak. Even his first suit, which was created when he was weaker, was S rank. This was somehow much more difficult to achieve than creating a suit that granted E rank, the power of an S rank hunter. With the suit created, the smile on his face refused to go off as this meant that his goal to being the absolute richest was working, or at least was in the way to being achieved. The prototype was done, but he had yet to add on the other abilities he needed to add. A survival kit wasn't part of it yet. He needed the suit to be capable of allowing a hunter survive no matter the situation he finds his/herself in. Of course, the suit couldn't save you from overwhelming power. If he didn't dodge some of Baron's attacks, he would be long dead. TH3 suit was also incapable of saving one from all attacks. Whatever technique Baron used to bypass his defenses and shut down his heart was one of such abilities. The suit wasn't designed for such type of survival. It was more environmental. If trapped, the suit should be able to grant its users about a day's worth of oxygen, nutrients, and basic things he needs to survive for just a day. That is if he figures it out though. The job of figuring out how to fit all of this into the small suit was left to Judy, who was basically an artificial intelligence. In fact, he could argue that she was smarter than your normal AI, so if anyone was to figure it out, it would be her. While she worked on that, Steve focused on the other things. He didn't need to rush anything, but he wanted to do it now that he had a chance to do so. He had a feeling that from tomorrow, things wouldn't be as free for him as it is now. Chapter 75, Drone. Before him now was a small orb, an orb just like the ones he created within the gate. It floated inches off the table and looked almost exactly like a cue ball. Its size, however, was slightly larger than the average cue ball. For what it was intended, it was probably the most important for him. It was a drone, a camera to the inside of a gate. Like his communication system, it uses mana to encrypt and send messages. These messages aren't limited to time or space due to the omnipresent nature of mana. This was how his earpiece worked. It utilized mana's ever-present nature as the life force of the universe to send and receive messages. The very details of it were much more fantastical and also logical, but that was a discussion for another time. Its purpose, however, made it the one thing he knew would surely sell even more than the suits. It was a drone. Like a drone, it captures video and photos from high up in the sky. The plan for it was for it to be some kind of security camera/communication device within the gate. The biggest problem within the gate remains the fact that what happens within a gate remains in the gate. This unwritten law has led to a lot of unnecessary deaths and some jungle justice in the past. Of course, it wasn't that he didn't understand why not many hunters actually complained about it. The answer was simple: no one knew when it would be them doing the killing within the dungeon. Now he was the outside man, and one day, some bastard would try his luck, and within a gate, he could make quick work of the person and make up some story he wanted without anyone questioning him. Now with this fancy cue ball, that privilege is completely removed. As he designed it, he added in a few features including Protection V. It wouldn't be able to do what it has been made to do if it could be easily destroyed. Sir, I think I figured it out. However, this only replaces the user's source of sustenance from normal food and the others to mana, Judy said after a while. That is a really good idea, Steve said as he dropped the drone in his hand. Turning to the girl, he could see a holographic screen floating above her hand. On it was the suit, and beside it was a bunch of information related to how she had achieved it. The idea itself was normal. It was surprising that he didn't even think of it, but thinking about it now, even if he didn't have the idea, he wouldn't be able to pull it off as well as she had done so. The suit still looked completely normal. There was no additional apparatus attached, which was good considering that it was an armor created for combat. Any extra weight could mean the death of a hunter. You've done well. Chapter 76, Lease. Thank you, Sir, Judy answered before returning to her seat just a few meters back. He had yet to create a workshop that would truly utilize Judy's true capabilities to its fullest, so for now, she was a bit of a hindrance, hence why she gave way. After inspecting the new design, Steve immediately began to implement it. Everything was already thought out by Judy, so all he had to do was follow an already provided formula. For the rest of the day, Steve remained in his basement as he designed and created several tools, weapons, suits, etc. that he may need later on. Apgujeong, Seoul. Within a large apartment-sized space, Steve could be seen with several other people. All of them were in suits and dressed as corporate as possible. That is all, sir, so do you like it? One of them asked, a female with blonde hair. She was also the shortest in the group. You never told me that there was no other business in the building, Steve replied. About that, the building is relatively new. However, we can assure you that you will enjoy using this building for your business, the other man answered. I know that. I want the entire building. Lease for about. Steve said as he trailed off and turned to Judy, who was standing just behind him as though he couldn't remember what he wanted to say. A year, sir, Judy said. A year? I would like to rent the entire building for a year, Steve said as he turned back to the two real estate agents. A year? I'm sorry, sir, that is against our policy. You can rent the entire building, but we do not collect the total payment at once. You pay what you owe and that's all, sir, the man answered as a weird tense atmosphere descended on the group. I see, that's a very interesting business plan. Well, it doesn't matter, give it to me, Steve said. Okay then, sir, if you can bear with us for another 30 minutes, we would like to prepare all the papers. Sure, go ahead, I just need it today, Steve replied as he stepped back. It had been a week since he came out of the Red Gate, and just like anyone could have guessed, he was now supremely popular. There was even a whole Reddit space dedicated to figuring him out. It was interesting but scary at the same time. Also turns out Baron's Gate was an S-ranked gate, which meant that he was roughly on par with the national level hunters. The news was always on about it. Even at the moment, the billboard beside the building was showing a picture of him with huge question mark on it. Is he Korea's second national level hunter? This headline was everywhere. The invitations for an interview had grown so much that he feared that one day, a desperate reporter or something would break into his house. Anyway, that would have been a true worry if the association wasn't actively securing him. Chapter 77, You now own the building. They hid his location and even had a secret protection detail on him at all times. Soul Perception V turns out to be way much more useful than he initially thought. All living things had souls, which means that nothing as long as it was alive was hidden from him. Apart from their protection detail, Steve also took some steps of his own. Currently he was a dark-skinned man who looked to be around 40 or so years old. Judy's appearance remained roughly the same, but she turned her hair white. It wasn't much, but people surprisingly didn't focus much on her. About 30 minutes later, the real estate agents finally returned with the various papers and Steve signed them using his real name. That much had yet to leak. Well, that's all then, Mr. Grant, the building is now yours, the man said as he handed over the documents and offered Steve a handshake, which he took. Thank you, Mr. Sangshik. Question though, I can begin usage today, right? Of course, sir, you have signed everything, the building is now yours for the entire month. I see, then I can begin setting up shop then. That's right, sir, if that is all, sir, we would like to take our leave, the woman asked. Oh sorry, that's all, Steve replied with a smile as the two bowed before leaving. Steve stood by the window side of the building, which was a very large glass plane. He could see everything outside as they could also see him. Truthfully, he still wasn't used to such type of buildings. He had only been introduced to them in this new life. He knew about their existence in his past life, but he had never been in one until now. Well, this life not now exactly. Steve stood and watched as the real estate agents got into their cars and left. The building was now theirs and the keys were on the table. The truck is almost here, sir, Judy suddenly said. Judy, prepare for renovations, Steve said as a large screen appeared before him. On the screen was live video footage of a truck maneuvering through traffic. He could see several vehicles all around it, but the truck moved at a steady pace and seemed to obey every traffic law in the area. It took Elon Musk more than 8 years to create a self-driving car, and I do the same in less than a week, Steve said proudly as the truck continued to maneuver through the streets peacefully and with ease. After a while, there was a honk at the gate of the building as Steve ran down to open it. The place didn't have a gateman, nor did it have any other luxury as of yet apart from the general security guards who protected the area. With the gate open, Steve was now face to face with a giant truck. It was oddly shaped as one would expect from his design, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that it moved, and very well at that. Mr. Grant, you have no idea how glorious this thing is, a voice called as Steve watched a middle-aged man jump out of the truck. It's like it has a mind of its own. I didn't even need to make any corrections. I told you, Steve said to the man with a knowing smile. Chapter 78, Renovate. Anyway, sir, here are your keys, the man said before handing over a set of keys. Thank you, your payment has already been transferred, Steve said as he gave a small bow to show his appreciation before watching the man leave. Now let's get to work, Steve said before walking to the back of the truck. Open, Steve said while looking towards Judy, who was standing by the window upstairs. Following his command, the truck opened up and its contents were revealed. There were about 4 weird-looking spider-bot things that were just sitting there, and behind them was a whole bunch of stuff that he needed. I think you're up then, Steve said as he gave way. Immediately he did so. The bots awakened as they immediately began to walk out of the truck. They barely matched his height, reaching a height of about 2 feet. The bots were Judy's design. He had still yet to truly develop a designer's mindset. Naturally, he was capable of designing and creating anything there was under the sun, at least he should be able to. But as proven by the nourishment apparatus of the suit, he wasn't that good at coming up with a functional design from scratch. In fact, it was best to say that he wasn't as imaginative as he thought he was. Anyway, under Judy's control, they left the truck and began walking toward the various corners of the compound. Several seconds later, Steve saw what looked like a magic stone rise from the back of each one of the bots. As soon as it did, he saw them glow as the fence they stood in front of began to grow to form a massive cubic barrier all around the building. The point of it was to block off the sight of everyone from the building. As per his contract with the company, he didn't have the right to alter the building in any large way. He could hang up some signs and decorate the interior, but she wasn't to touch the main building itself. However, he was about to create a store that every hunter and their mother would want to visit. If such a store exists, then it was also sensible that was made to be as durable as possible, and besides, the building didn't have everything he wanted. He wanted to create a weapon store. Such places usually came with a testing range, a changing spot and more, but with how this place was designed, none of that was possible. With the barrier formed, the outside world would continue to see the image of the old building while the bots rebuilt it in the way he wanted, but with the same general structure. The bots only took about a minute to completely demolish the building after Judy had taken a scan of it, and after that, they began rebuilding, with materials Judy provided. Honestly, the more I learn about Baron's abilities from seeing Judy do what she does, the more I realize how much luck I had during that battle. It was either luck or Baron was just plain stupid for not realizing how much more powerful he was than me. How were my nuclear attacks even affecting him in the first place? He could manipulate it, so why didn't he just do so? Did his pre-resurrected self not have access to those powers, or what? Chapter 79, Re-evaluation. Ringtone. Hello, who knows me? Steve answered as soon as he picked up the call. Good day, sir. Am I speaking to Mr. Grant? A female voice was heard from the other side of the call. Yes, what is it? Okay, sir, I am from the Korean Hunter Association, the lady said. Okay, sir, on behalf of the United Hunter Association, you have been invited to the association building tomorrow. This is because of my re-evaluation, isn't it? I believe so, sir. Okay then, I'll be there, Steve said before the call was cut. He wasn't all that surprised by the call. He had been expecting it for a while now and was even surprised that it hadn't come since. From the news going up and down, the fact that he had entered the dungeon alone was now common knowledge. The association kind of had no way of stopping that. It would seem as though no one had developed any form of ability that allowed them to overturn the internet completely. There were pictures, camera footage from CCTV cameras in the area, ATMs, etc. It was from these that the theory that he was on par with a national-level hunter came about. He, himself, wasn't very sure if he actually was, since he had yet to actually access his strength against the chairman. He didn't think of it when he was with the man back then. Since the main requirement to become a national-level hunter was to clear an S-rank gate alone, his best guess was that this invitation from the United Association was to re-evaluate him and put him in the appropriate rank. Of course, it didn't matter much to him though. His goal was to be rich, not to be a gate-hopping monkey. Gates were dangerous, and even if he was now more powerful, he didn't want to enter another gate again. The new rank would definitely benefit him greatly. After all, it would take Architect's studio to a whole new standing just because it was owned by a national-level hunter. Steve sat with that in his mind as the bots did their job. Due to their magical nature, the construction was going very quickly. Judy had long since provided enough materials, so all they had to do was to build. Just 2 hours later, Steve was looking at the newly built building. It looked exactly like the former, but it now came with added protection, as well as a few other added features. Since it was done, the bots immediately returned to the truck. They were done, and now it was for him to inspect the design and their work. Steve entered the building and he began to check everything, cross-referencing them with the blueprint that he had with him. The building was a replica as he had hoped it would be. The building had 2 floors, the ground floor and the first. Both had undergone some serious changes that didn't really affect the overall look of the place. It still looked the same. However, the interior was now designed to look like a shop. That was the original plan. The ground floor would be used for selling weapons, while the first would be used for all things clothing, be it armor or just fancy suits. Chapter 80, Sentinel. Judy, how much richer do you think I would be if I put my hands into pharmacy? Steve asked. Approximately 49% richer, sir, Judy answered before going quiet again as usual. I see. Anyway, let's go. We can finish the setup later, Steve said after a brief moment of thinking. He had yet to do the standard registrations needed for such a business. It may not be known, but South Korea isn't one of those places where you can set up a weapon store and just begin to sell. Its laws don't even allow for civilian carry, so if not for the gate situation, one wouldn't find anyone walking around with the amount of weapons hunters carry. With that thought in mind, he turned around and got into his car as he and his new assistant left the area. The truck and the construction bots that had just done their work would remain. Steve wasn't afraid of them being stolen. If you really had the power to steal them, then you kind of deserved to have them at that point. It was just that simple. That day, the duo went around as Steve ensured that all the papers required to open such a store were in order. Of course, he also knew that after his presentation, possibly sometime next week or so, the government would probably try to shut down the store due to how efficient his weapons were. In a brightly lit room somewhere on the mainland, 3 people could be seen within this room, all dressed in fancy and proper outfits. Their suits shone brightly, reflecting their standing in society. "Never thought you would come here personally," one of them said, his voice deep and clearly belonging to an older man. "Of course, I have to. Korea seems to be on the rise as of late. An S-rank with the power to single-handedly clear a high-end A-rank dungeon and a craftsman who single-handedly cleared an S-rank dungeon, a red gate at that," the other man replied. His voice sounded just as old, but there seemed to be a bit more life to him than the other man. "I expect nothing less from British intelligence," the first man said. "And who is this? You know about my prospects but not my assistant? You guys are really falling short. Just answer the question, Mr. Gunhee," the other man said, fed up, as a smile appeared on the old chairman's face. "This is my assistant and the surveillance chief, Woo Jin-chul," Mr. Gunhee said as Woo Jin-chul bowed but remained standing behind the chairman. "A rank? That's impressive," the man said. "Now, I still don't see what would bring you down to Korea personally. Last I remember, the Sentinel doesn't involve itself in the standard association power struggle. Cut the bull, you know why I am here. That, you would have to do on your own, but I don't think it would go well for you," Mr. Gunhee said. "Don't worry, Sentinel has its ways," the man said with a smile before finally sitting properly as they began to discuss other things.